The Smith family was proud of their family tradition. Their ancestors had come to America on the famous Mayflower ship. They'd included senators and financial wizards. And the Smiths decided to compile a family history, a legacy for their children and their grandchildren. They hired a fine author. Only one problem arose: how to handle that great Uncle George who had been executed in the electric chair in a government prison. Well, the author said he could handle the story very tactfully. When the book finally appeared, it read, "Great Uncle George occupied a chair of applied electronics at an important government institution. He was attached to his position by the strongest of ties, and his death came as a great shock." Well, you know, we can intentionally use words to mislead, can't we? But we can unintentionally use words to mislead as well. And I realized as I was working on this lecture that I could give you a detailed account of everything bioethical that's transpired in the last 3 decades here at Trinity and greatly mislead you in the process. It wouldn't have been intentional, but to view the story of bioethics at Trinity from a human perspective is to miss the most important part of the story, the fact that this is God's story. At so many points along the way, things have happened that don't make sense if the guiding and providing hand of God isn't recognized. You might think of it this way. Consider the cross of Jesus Christ. Now, once Jesus had died and been removed from the cross, it didn't look like much to a lot of people. But those with eyes to see, who knew what had really happened, recognized that God had been at work, and that on the basis of that work was going to do amazing things in the years ahead. Well, that's one way to think about bioethics at Trinity. You can look around this place and see a bunch of boards and bricks and people and programs, or you can know the rest of the story. You can recognize what God has done, things so amazing that you can hardly wait to see what God is going to do next. So here's the story of bioethics at Trinity. God's story. Bioethics, what's right and wrong, good and bad, for example, when it comes to matters of healthcare and biotechnology. Bioethics has long been with us. It concerns the making of human beings, for example, not only the so-called natural way, but also using a rapidly growing array of reproductive and genetic technologies that have great power to harm as well as to help. Bioethics also includes the increasingly amazing realm of healthcare in which not only healing is possible, but also enhancing human beings. But who gets access to what? And is it so clear that becoming beyond human is really better rather than worse? Well, bioethics also includes the various challenges of our all too rapidly aging society, including the temptations to prematurely pull the plug or to assist the suicide of vulnerable, older, or disabled people. Now, in Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler used misguided bioethics to argue that it was acceptable to kill the weak and the elderly, even people of a particular race. In the United States, the U.S. Supreme Court used a misguided bioethics to argue that it was acceptable to consider Dred Scott here less than a full person because of his race, and therefore unworthy of the protections and provisions normally given to a human being. What was missing in these various travesties of bioethics was the recognition of human dignity, and that made all the difference. As documented in the recent book, Why People Matter, virtually everyone today believes in something like human dignity and the idea that people matter. But as that book also demonstrates, without God and God's word, the idea of human dignity ultimately doesn't make sense. Accordingly, it's not surprising that in the face of challenges to human existence that may dwarf Nazi Germany and the Dred Scott decision, God has raised up an institution to champion human dignity, grounded in the creation and renewal of human beings in God's image. Trinity is that institution, first through the Divinity School, then through the Center for Bioethics and, what's that name again? Bioethics and Human Dignity, and then through the Graduate School, and more recently through the multifaceted Trinity International University. And I'm here today to tell the tale, really to preach the good news of Trinity's leadership in a way that distinguishes it from all other Christian institutions, in fact, from all other institutions, period. Trinity's leadership is marked by grounding a multi-pronged bioethical engagement in the Word of God. So it's fitting to introduce each of the chapters in this story of Trinity's engagement with bioethics and human dignity with a passage from Scripture that represents this biblical grounding. Then I'll summarize all too briefly ways that God has been glorified during each of those chapters of Trinity's existence. I'm going to be surveying today the 4 chapters in the story of bioethics at Trinity. Chapter 1 is primarily about TEDS. Chapter 2 is primarily about CBHD. Chapter 3 is primarily about TGS. And Chapter 4 is all about TIU. So, Chapter 1, TEDS. The current TEDS Henry Center project on creation and the role of TEDS in the beginning of bioethics at Trinity make it appropriate to connect the initial stage of the development of bioethics at Trinity with TEDS and with the biblical idea introduced in Genesis that people are created in the image of God. It's the very foundation of human dignity. Now, as explained in great detail in the book Dignity and Destiny, people being created according to the image of God means that people have a special connection with God and are intended to be a reflection of God. That's been true of bioethics at Trinity all along as well. Its work has been God-centered, and it has always sought to reflect God's character and priorities to God's glory. Well, to see the beginning of that story, you have to go back into the 1980s and see one of the TEDS faculty members, Harold O.J. Brown, who was here. He had a history working with crisis pregnancy centers. He knew that there was much more coming down the pike in terms of bioethics and the challenges there. And so he brought over from Europe one of their best exports, Nigel Cameron, to be a part of the faculty here and to help develop things bioethical at TEDS. And there were various early initiatives that came on the scene. There was the bioethics emphasis in the MA in Christian Thought, one of the degrees in TEDS. There was a bioethics minor instituted at the college. There was a bioethics colloquium series that was instituted to take place at TEDS each spring. Now, although there were various things that began with TEDS, the TEDS story continues. So although CBHD comes on the scene pretty soon thereafter in 1993, the story of bioethics at TEDS continues on. So these are not completely separate chapters in the history of Trinity. In fact, one of the high points of the engagement of TEDS with the realm of bioethics had to do with, and came to fruition, when TEDS obtained a grant from the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning to explore the notion of what does the church have to contribute? What does the seminary have to contribute to engaging these critical issues of human life and human dignity? And so a process took place in which the TEDS faculty, with representatives from all departments across the faculty at TEDS, engaged in a process over about a year and a half of thinking through the implications of Christian faith and what disciplines like preaching and counseling and intercultural studies and et cetera what difference they made for the life of the church and people's engagement with bioethical issues. That resulted in the book, Why the Church Needs Bioethics, and that was the product of key people representing all of the different areas of the Divinity School. Each of the people who were the authors actually convened meetings of their entire departments, or in some cases multiple departments, to spend time together working this out, working out the implications of their discipline for these bioethical issues. People like Kevin Van Hooser and Don Carson and Richard Averbeck and Harold Netlin and Bruce Fields and Miriam Parent and Steve Grego and Greg Scharf and Steve Roy and people who were on the faculty earlier, not still with us, like Miriam Parent and Educational Ministries and Paige Cunningham from the realm of law. 19 in all. This really is a God story, I have to tell you. If you know much about faculty anywhere, and all of the time-demanding agendas that people have and all the work that they're doing, the idea that all of these people across the entire range of the seminary would work together on a project to say, what does all of this have to do with the key issues of our day? I mean, nothing less than the hand of God can be seen in that taking having taken place, and it's gone into multiple printings to help with the life of the church. Okay, well, Chapter 1, TEDS. That's the original origin of bioethics at Trinity. Chapter 2, CBHD. The launching of CBHD was a demonstration to the world that bioethics was not just a passing fancy for Trinity, with a beginning and then an end soon thereafter. Rather, that launching was an affirmation that bioethics was somehow going to distinguish Trinity throughout its time here on earth. As people continue fully in the image of God, even after the fall, so bioethics at Trinity, in God's image, has been a steady presence in recent decades, and all the more since the founding of CBHD. It began in the summer of 1993 when Nigel Cameron had the idea to call together 12 or so leading Christian bioethicists from around the country. Our assignment was heavy. We had this huge binder of materials that we were to read and come fully informed and ready to go to explore, were Christians really engaging the bioethical issues of today? Or really was there only an awareness of abortion and that was about it, while all of these other incredible issues were coming down the pike? The result of that consultation was there was no structure, there was no vehicle in the Christian church to facilitate this engagement across denominations and across institutions and across professions. A center was needed. It needed to be established. We needed to have a point person there as far as that was concerned. And so developed criteria: had to be a committed Christian, had to have good publicly recognizable credentials, had to have a commitment and a passion to the bioethical issues. Well, God had been working on me several months before that gathering took place. I was one of the people who attended that gathering. I was working in a setting where we were engaging bioethics and we were attentive to religious perspectives, but there was a lot more interest in Islamic ethics and Hindu ethics and Jewish ethics than on what are the implications of the gospel for ethics. You know, the Bible, Christianity, that's kind of old hat. You see that happening in various university contexts as well. So I was having more and more of a sense of, Lord, I don't think this is where you want me to be pouring my life out for you. And then this gathering takes place. And then it becomes clear there needs to be a director. And I was the only one that had experience working in a center as well as understanding and knowledge in the field of bioethics. And so all eyes kind of began turning here. It's just like, what do you think about leaving where you are and what you're doing and taking up this work? Well, again, it's a God story. In July 1993, we began work on the first national conference to take place here at Trinity in May of 1994. The one thing about that, here is that first conference, in fact, with me opening up the Christian Stake in Bioethics Conference. When we launched the center initially, it was under a broader rubric called the Bannockburn Institute. And we thought we might be able to raise up a number of centers addressing different aspects of contemporary life. What ended up happening is that the Bioethics Center grew so rapidly, so fast, that the decision had to be made to focus specifically on this area of bioethics. And so, again, by May of 1994, we were already out with a national conference. Here we are opening that. Here you can see from last summer, Paige opening the conference here. Again, every summer, that summer conference has been a key mark. And what has really been nothing less than a God story is the way that people all over this country and all over this world who are in top positions, hugely busy people, but Christians whom God has raised up and put in positions of responsibility have just responded to the notion of there being a center, a place where Christians can actually come and talk openly about their faith and the implications of their Christian faith for these critical bioethical issues. The second conference we had in the heyday of Jack Kevorkian, we had in his attorney, Jeffrey Feiger, debating the eminent Edmund Pellegrino. But through the years, I've had people like, the British Minister of Health, the U.S. Surgeon General, U.S. Senator, Director of the FDA, people in science from the National Institutes of Health, from NASA, from MIT, from the Human Genome Project to map the human genetic code. We've had people like Chuck Colson and Ravi Zacharias and Johnny Erickson Tata and our own John Feinberg holding our feet to the fire to make sure that what is going on here is biblical and theologically grounded. And even two chairmen of the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics have come here to speak. And I remember vividly, as Leon Kass was stepping down from that post, heading up the body designed to chart policy on bioethical issues for the country of the United States of America, I was on the telephone with Ed Pellegrino, whom you see here also. We were talking about another matter. And he said, John, I've got to tell you something, completely confidential. You can't say anything about this. But the President of the United States has just asked me to take up the chairmanship of his Council on Bioethics because Leon Kass is stepping down. And I want you to know that I've told him that I'm only willing to do so under one condition, and that is that I'm allowed to continue my involvement with the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, when you step up into a position like this, generally speaking, you have to set aside involvements and engagements that involve you in particular issues or organizations that have a particular perspective on the issue. But he said, at my time of life, I only have, a limited number of years left, and I have to be involved in what is going to count. Now, I'm happy to help on this national level. This would be a huge privilege, but I'm not going to set aside what I see as really important in the perspective of eternity. And that, in terms of bioethics, is the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity. I mean, my jaw, I think, dropped and hit the floor. Like, the President asked you to do that, and instead of yes, sir, it's like, well, only if I can consider my involvement with the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity. That's exactly what he said, and the President relented, so he took up the chairmanship. The next conference, as I say, after the initial general conference, we decided to focus each year on a particular topic. The next year was on end-of-life issues, and we produced a book, Dignity and Destiny, or Dignity and Dying, excuse me, on those end-of-life issues. Now again, I mean, how can you even understand this apart from the hand of God? As that book came out, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to take on the next big bioethical issue that it had taken up. Nearly 25 years earlier, it had taken up the Roe v. Wade case, and the abortion issue had been settled. And people were saying, oh, it's hopeless. We can't really have any impact on the culture. You might as well just forget cultural engagement. We see where they went with in the abortion issue, and just every issue that comes down the pike, we're going to find a right to do whatever people want to do, right to commit assisted suicide, just like we found the right to abort. Well, at that point in time, as I say, the book had just come out. We were able to get it into the hands of all 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices. 2 of them wrote us back, indicating that this was exactly the kind of information they needed, that they didn't have in Roe v. Wade, to really see all of the implications of opening up or finding a right to something, a right that, of course, was not explicitly there, but what would be the implications in our culture and our world. Now, we were working together with many other organizations, and CBHD is a very collaborative sort of enterprise. So many people were engaged in that particular case. But as you may know, the Supreme Court went the opposite way that it went in Roe v. Wade, 9-0, refusing to find any right to assisted suicide in the Constitution. It was that same year when we began doing regional conferences. During the first 10 years, we did about 50 different locations around the country and around the world. And we were slated to do a conference focusing on end-of-life issues in Boston. And through a contact, he got us the use of a building at Harvard because it was a weekend conference and nothing was going on there. Well, because the U.S. Supreme Court had agreed to take up this big end-of-life assisted suicide case, CBS Evening News decided to do a big informational program to explain kind of to the people what the issues were, what the implications were, and that sort of thing. And as they were trying to figure out how they were going to go about doing this, they discovered, oh, there's a conference on these very issues at Harvard University this weekend. We'll just go there and we'll interview the speakers at the conference, and we'll will get the information on what's happening and its implications. And so the entire program, kind of communicating to the broader world and public was simply a reflection and based on the speakers that we had, both staff from the center and other key people we had brought in. Only God can do these. I mean, you could strategize in our strategic plan. We want to do that, but you just couldn't do that. I mean, it's just really the hands of God. So each year we did the conference. A book flowed from the conference, and there are many various booklets on various topics were produced in many different languages in Asia and Latin America. We were able to obtain the key communication vehicles, again, a hand of God. How in the world, when the 888 numbers come out, you can get 888 bioethics? It's just amazing, but we did. We were late, though, on the internet, because when the center came into being, it was like 5 or 6 years down the road. I mean, the internet had been going. There's no way in the world you could get a site like bioethics.com and be right in the center of where everybody in the world would look for information on bioethics. We checked it out on the internet to see, which of the secular centers had it, and there was nothing. So we did some research, and we found that a young man up in Canada, when the internet was first getting going, snatched this site and tucked it away. He was looking for some organization or network that shared his Christian values and commitment to be able to inform the world about these issues in an unbiased way, give people objective information, and put with that, when appropriate, counsel to go with that. And so several of the major bioethics centers had offered him huge sums of money for this site. He had been sued twice to try to wrest legal control of this site from his hands, but he had prevailed in both cases. And when staff from the center here met with him and shared our vision, we found that it was exactly the vision of CBHD is what he had been waiting for. So many years before even the idea of CBHD existed, the key site to make all that's going on here to be able to pass out into the heart of the culture through the internet was already being set aside, and at the right time then became the centers. You just cannot control those things or manage those things. I mean, it's the story of God. And so on it goes. When the stem cell research issue first came to the fore, nobody had ever heard of it. So the center convened a team to think through the issues, develop a white paper, pass that through political channels all the way on up to the White House. The center did play such a significant role with that particular issue that when the president issued his ban on further destruction of embryonic human life and signed that into law, the center was present in the White House as a part of that, just as an acknowledgement of the role that had been played there. Well, what happened next is 2005, I moved over from the center into the graduate school to develop the master's degree in bioethics further, still rooted in the divinity school as I have been throughout my 25 years here. And there were several people who played a temporary, part-time, interim role in guiding the center forward until the next long-term director was able to be put in place. And those people are Andrew Ferguson, Ben Mitchell, and Michael Sleesman. During that time, a lot of things happened. The Academy of Fellows developed further. This is just a recent shot from Academy meeting. It was a time for collaboration, scholars from the center and associated with the center working together to develop very significant books and other resources. There was a regional conference in Phoenix featuring a very interesting debate between transhumanist Aubrey de Grey and J.L. Shansky. And there was a transformative gift that was the product of a number of years that came to Trinity, not only to CBHD, but to all of bioethics at Trinity. What that was all about is a man went to a conference, and there was a speaker there talking about bioethics and what was coming down the pike. And he listened, and not like, most of us go to a conference, oh, that was interesting, that was an interesting topic, oh, that's an important issue. But he was like, if these issues are as important as you're talking about, then we've got to do something about it. He went up to the speaker afterwards and said, I don't want to just learn about this. We've got to do something about this. Like, is there anybody that that I could give money to enable some significant things to happen. He said, I'm not a bioethicist. I don't do anything in the field, but I'm a human being, and I recognize the critical importance of these issues. And the speaker said, yeah, in fact, there is. There's this organization developing on the campus of Trinity, Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity. So he called me up out of the blue. Over the period of several years, he gave relatively smaller gifts to see what we'd be able to do. We were faithful in little. And so then he said, what could you do with $1.25 million over several years? I said, quite a lot, thank you. And then building on that foundation, that became a platform on which a number of other significant donors have played such a significant role in the years since then. And all we can say is thank you to God and thank you to those people who are listening to God to be able to resource what's been going on here. Well, at the end of this interim period, Michael Sleesman handed over the reins of the directorship to Paige Cunningham, who is now the executive director for the center. Mike continues as the managing director of the center. And there have just been a whole range of fascinating initiatives. If only I had more time. The Global Bioethics Education Initiative, which has matured into the International Bioethics Scholars Program. The Academy of Fellows has developed further. The summer conferences have continued under the able leadership of first Jennifer McVeigh and now Sharon Gustafson. Much networking with various organizations and conferences and churches and various institutions. And a very exciting initiative, the Global Women's Health Initiative and the Her Dignity Network, because so many of these bioethical issues cash out in a way that is incredibly challenging and sometimes quite destructive for women in particular, when you think of all the reproductive issues and human trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. The CBHD Research Library has been developing in recent years with the Pellegrino Collection. The newsletter, originally the Dignity newsletter, developed and matured into the Dignitas newsletter and now becoming a peer-reviewed journal. Continued engagement, the research side of things, monitored especially and overseen by Mike. Paige, very much engaged in the public engagement aspect with U.S. congressional briefings, testimony before congressional panels, consultations in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I've mentioned the internet sites, bioethics.com, the flagship site, CBHD.org, receiving 2 million visits from over 200 countries annually now. Very sought-after resource. Again, Everyday Bioethics, another site for, at a more lay level, church orientation. Christian BioWiki, which lays out the positions of various church denominations on the bioethics issues, and Her Dignity Network as a website as well. Through all of this, I mean, the center gets so many requests for information and help that it definitely takes a full staff. You can see a recent staff picture of those who are engaged in doing the work of the center. You probably won't be surprised in light of this that someone with the stature of the U.S. Surgeon General, C. Everett Koop, who really was among the very first to bring these bioethical issues to the attention of the church together with Francis Schaeffer, has written this. He says, the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity is brilliantly carrying on the groundbreaking analysis that Francis Schaeffer and I began over a quarter century ago, critiquing contemporary culture and developing Christian alternatives in the face of immense bioethical challenges. And arguably the highest placed medical person in this country, the head of the National Institutes of Health. Let's see what he has to say about the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity.
One of the things that I am most concerned about is the need to bring a faith perspective to the discussion of the appropriate use of genetics. The Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity has been performing a very effective function by organizing conferences, by bringing people together to brainstorm about these issues, by trying to plan in a positive, productive, proactive way, a path forward that will increase the likelihood of a good outcome.
And so all we could really do is just give thanks to so many people who have played a role in the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity being what it is today. And that thanks could be extended to the staff of the center over the course of the years, people like Jim Moscato and Linda or Cammie Bevington, Dan McConkey, who's now an Illinois state senator. It needs to be extended to the presidents who have played a key oversight and shepherding role, very much to President David Dockery, to the deans, Dean Kornman and Hedges, Dean Cole and Johnson, who have provided the fertile soil in which all of this can develop, and the faculty and the other participants and speakers, everybody who's involved in this that make all of this a community. It's just been amazing, but couldn't happen without so many people. Okay, let me briefly just give you the essence of what has come on in terms of Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Chapter 3 is all about TGS, as I mentioned. And while bioethics at TEDS began in the 80s and CBHD was developing from 1993 onward, Trinity's commitment to bioethics took on a whole new dimension in 1997 with the opening of the graduate school. Kenneth Conser, who was the first dean of the graduate school after his years at TEDS, recognized in consultation with Provost Nigel Cameron and the bioethics faculty at TEDS at the time that the ability to offer a one-year master's degree purely in bioethics, which wasn't allowed by the accrediting body of TEDS, would enable current and future leaders from all over the U.S. and various parts of the world to gain valuable credentials in this mushrooming field of bioethics. Now, just as being renewed according to God's image enables believers to become more fully what God has always intended them to be, the graduate school has enabled a greater fullness of God's ethical purposes for TIU to become actually realized. TIU was not only to be a center, CBHD, that engages the bioethical challenges of today, it was also to become a school that equips people across the professions to provide leadership for engaging the bioethical challenges of tomorrow. And that is indeed what it has become. As I say, I moved over to oversee that work around 2004, 2005, and that opened up a number of opportunities. I'm just going to flag one because it's very significant for what's unfolded here. It was to be one of the two North American representatives on the Bioethics Task Force of the Lausanne World Evangelization Movement's global forum gathering in Thailand. Now, as you may know, that the Lausanne movement, every generation, does a study of what are the greatest opportunities for the gospel in this generation. And it had just completed its last study in 200 locations around the globe. And one of the top opportunities that showed up on its published list was bioethics. People are scratching their heads and going, bioethics, what is that? Much less, how is that one of the greatest opportunities for the gospel in our day? Well, it turns out that what they had found is that for so many people who live under the illusion that they are, in control of their body, their lives, or whatever, it's at that point where that control is stripped away, and it may be an end-of-life situation, a challenge to their health, an infertility situation, and that illusion is stripped away, and suddenly they realize that they are not in control. They need bioethical information to deal with the problem, to deal with the issue, the challenge that's before them, but they also need the gospel, and it is a uniquely open time in their life to be receptive to the gospel. That's what they found. And so being in that forum and being there provided an international platform for Trinity, and people became aware of the fact that these issues and this opportunity for the gospel was really being headquartered not only nationally but internationally here at Trinity. There have been many signs since then that something special is going on here through the graduate school. For example, the alumni of the graduate school write a blog. It's called Bioethics at TIU. And amazingly, it's been selected because of its quality to flow automatically onto the major secular bioethics blog. So without even being screened, every post that our graduates put up there analyzing an issue, even when there's a reference to Jesus Christ in it, flows automatically onto this blog and reaches the entire secular sphere in bioethics. This is just a God thing. But it's a reflection not only of what God has done, but also of the quality of what's being done here and how that's being recognized. But at the end of the day, the best way you can see evidence of the quality of that master's program is to see what's become of people who have gone through that program. Well, they become leaders of bioethics centers. The Center for Bioethics and Culture in California, right here, CBHD page, the Ohio State University, Cedarville University. Graduates have become in positions of influence, like the head of Christian Medical and Dental Association, National Institutes of Health, Georgetown University, University of Michigan, Yale University, University of Chicago, Americans United for Life. They've become heads of bioethics in such organizations as Lilly Pharmaceuticals, Mayo Clinic, Jacksonville, Focus on the Family. They've become engaged in international bioethics work through his foundation, Medical Education International, SIM. They've been involved and become involved in teaching bioethics in such locations as Harding University and Reformed Theological Seminary and Dallas Theological Seminary. God has done some amazing things through TGS. Well, Chapter 4, our final chapter. Adding TGS to CBHD, Chapter 3 represented a new dimension of bioethical engagement. However, the fullness of what God has in mind for bioethics at Trinity didn't become apparent until a macro structure came into being that now encompasses TEDS, TGS, CBHD, Trinity College, Trinity-Graduate-School, and on it goes. Bioethics plays a significant role throughout all of that now. But it's unlikely to be, but in fact, as we look ahead to the future, it's likely that to be a much bigger role as the years go on than anything that we can see or envision at the present. Christians today can't fully appreciate what it will be like to be fully in God's image and likeness in our resurrected bodies, although they can indeed count on the fact that they will be like him, as we know from 1 John 3:2. So even all of the ways that bioethics has become evident throughout the university today are not a definitive picture of all that God has in mind for the future of bioethics at Trinity, though what's unfolding now is giving us a taste of what it will be like. What we can see here is that there's synergies because of this university structure. The college and TGS together pioneered the first bioethics dual degree in the world, where 9 hours of undergraduate double count with the graduate degree program. Joyce Shelton has played a key role in that development. TEDS and TGS have worked together, pioneering multiple master's degree programs, adding the Masters of Arts in Bioethics to the MDiv, or the MATS, or the MA in Ministry, or the MA in Chaplaincy and Ministry Care. Only about 5 courses beyond the TEDS degree is required to leave with that public secular credential of bioethics as well. The graduate school and the law school and CBHD working together, not only in the new legal bioethics emphasis in the legal studies degree at TLS, but also resourcing that through online bioethics resources and other efforts at the Center of Human Rights out there. There have been opportunities, for example, TGS and CBHD, people working together to develop really important resources for the church and the world. I referenced further the book, Why People Matter, where members of the TGS faculty, like Ray and Di Silvestro and myself, could work together on a project like this. But it also creates mentoring opportunities, which CBHD is fostering through its Academy of Fellows, enabling me to work with people like Patrick Smith and Russell Di Silvestro. And the Spring Bioethics Colloquium Series continues to unfold, as you know, housed by TEDS, hosted by TGS, and helped by Trinity College, with the third and final colloquium each spring now being an endowed lectureship in which we're able to bring a person of great public significance, like Chris Hook from Mayo Clinic was just here, and William Hurlbut from Stanford University will be coming next year to speak to that. The center has also become a center for all of TIU, students being welcomed to do work in their research center, internships and fellowships available at the center from all parts of the university, such as the Orr TEDS Fellowship from TEDS here, and the Theological Bioethics Roundtable, in which people are participating in really clarifying the rich theological basis for all that we're doing here. And of particular excitement, the whole international dimension that is really at the cutting edge now of what the university is about in bioethics. The center started with a program bringing individual scholars from different parts of the world. One of the scholars had this idea of, well, what if we developed this program? And it's kind of developed and been refined, but the idea is phase one, a group of leaders from a country comes, and much of this is done online, though they do come to campus here, but they're trained, they're equipped with a master's degree in bioethics. Then they go, and in their country, they develop initiatives to train and equip in bioethics and the gospel people from communities all over the country. And then phase three is those people becoming the sources of bioethics information and the gospel to people in their communities all over the country. Well, that led to the first initiative in India, which has now completed phase one and is full speed into phase two. It's led to the launch of the Chinese Bioethics Initiative, which is midstream in phase one. And I have to tell you, as we move forward into the future, there have been some touching stories that have already come forward from this. One of the members of the India Bioethics Initiative, in her last year of study, she was still studying here. Yet while she was doing that, she was attending to her clinical duties in India one day when a poor, young Indian woman came up and who was pregnant and said that she absolutely had to have an abortion. She said that she was being beaten and terribly abused by her family in the rural area because of this pregnancy out of wedlock, and she had no other choice. Now, Ashita here, through her training in bioethics, knew what her negative response was to be, that abortion was not a good idea, but she also knew the way we approach bioethical issues here. That's not just telling people what not to do, it's telling people how we can meet their need, because there's always a real need there when people are turning to abortion or assisted suicide or whatever those things are. So often Christians are just saying no. But what she did is she put her training into practice, and she said, I'll tell you what, how about if you could come and live in my house throughout the pregnancy, and we'd give you the prenatal care you needed without charge. She was willing to do that. She stayed in the home. She learned some English. She read some scripture. She says she was treated with human dignity for the first time in her life. And she gave her life to Jesus Christ. A week after her son was born, another woman arrived at the clinic, almost identical circumstances, almost identical response from Ashita, and that baby's life was saved, and that mother's life was saved eternally. And all of that before she'd even graduated yet from Trinity. So this is really exciting. I just have to say, as we wrap up, remember how we started the presentation by looking at the cross? Well, Jesus Christ ended his life on the cross with the words, "It is finished." Now, to most of the people gathered around him that day, those words must have seemed an apt summary. I mean, Jesus' life was over. But those with eyes to see, then and later, realized that God's story in Christ was hardly done. It had barely begun. And so it is with the story of bioethics at Trinity. God's story. It has only just begun. And in fact, I have the joy of announcing publicly today, for the first time, Trinity's new Africa Bioethics Initiative, which will launch this September from its base in Kenya. A godly man looked at what was unfolding in the various other initiatives and simply said, I want to be a part of what God is so visibly doing in the world today. If you had the funding, could you do the same thing for another part of the world? The answer was yes, and the result was the Africa Bioethics Initiative. Yes, indeed, God has only just begun. So would you please join me right now in giving thanks to God for all he has done and will do through bioethics at Trinity?